in the far away fires, where the hills forever burn, at the feet of our heroes, we try hard to learn, but the lesson is lost there, in the smoke and the mud, that we are one flesh, one breath, one life, one blood.
Good afternoon. So sorry you had to wait so long, but traffic. Welcome everyone. Poly High School is especially proud to welcome Tim O'Brien, award-winning author and who has received critical international acclaim for his literary genius. Our focus today is on The Things They Carried. I was first introduced to this novel some 16 years ago and was immediately empowered by the multifaceted stories depicting Vietnam through the eyes of Vietnam veterans. I literally dreamed of the day I would explore this novel within my classroom and with my students. And I am so thankful every year to see the insight and the fresh new air you breathe into the lives of those characters and the stories. This novel is so much more than the best depiction of the realities and atrocities of Vietnam. It is a story about one's ability to endure the unendurable. It is a story about courage. It is a story about fear. It is a story about love. It is a story about the blurry line between fact and fiction. What makes this novel great, and that it will stand the test of time and has stood the test of time, is the fact that every individual reader can find the truth within the pages, regardless of whether they experienced Vietnam firsthand. Isn't that what a great piece of literature does? Awakens us to our inner truth. I dreamed of introducing you, my students, to The Things They Carried, but never in my wildest dreams did I dream I would be introducing you to Tim O'Brien. With that, I would like to welcome, as an enormous privilege, Tim O'Brien.
Sorry we're late. That was I felt like I was in the Indianapolis 500. She was moving. But we got here a little better late than never. I've been asked to do two things. First is to speak to you for about 20 minutes or so, which I'll do. Part of that time, I've also been asked to read a short section from The Things They Carry so you can hear it in the author's voice, how it sounds to me. What I thought I'd do is combine these two things and start by reading a little section and then spend the rest of my time for 10 minutes or so talking about where it came from, out of the real world. Because if I were a student in your shoes, I'd be kind of curious if I had an author here, like, so you gave us this story, where was it born and why did you write it and what did you try to, what were you hoping to do with it? I chose a really short section called Ambush that's I think I could read probably maybe 8 minutes or so, and then I want to spend the rest of the time talking about it. I cannot talk about the book as a whole in these 20 minutes. That'd be impossible. So when I'm talking about this chapter, in a way, I'm talking about the whole book, but through the lens of just one chapter. Okay, here we go. When she was 9, my daughter, by the way, don't follow along, because the whole purpose of this is for you not to look at the words and hear me read it. You can look at the words before I come or after I come, but I'm only going to be here once. And it's disconcerting for me not to have you looking at the book while I'm reading along, because among other things, you'll be seeing me change words as I'm reading. I look at your eyeballs, and that, for me, the important thing is not the exact language in the story, but to engage you. When she was 9, my daughter, Kathleen, asked if I'd ever killed anyone. She knew about the war. She knew I'd been a soldier. You keep writing these war stories, she said, so I guess you must have killed someone. It was a hard moment, but I did what I thought was right, which was to say, of course not, and then to take her onto my lap, and just hold her for a while. Someday, I hope, she'll ask again. But here, right now, I want to pretend she's a grown-up. I want to tell her exactly what happened, or what I remember happening. And then I want to say to her that as a little girl, she was absolutely right. This is why I keep telling war stories. He was a short, slender young man of about 20. I was afraid of him. Afraid of something. And as he passed me on the trail, I threw a grenade that landed at his feet and killed him. Or to go back, shortly after midnight, we moved into the ambush site outside a little village called Mike. The whole platoon was there, maybe 30 of us, spread out in the dense brush along the trail. And for 5 hours, nothing at all happened. We were working in 2-man teams, one man on guard while the other slept, switching off every 2 hours. And I remember it was still dark when my friend Kiowa shook me awake for the final watch. The night was foggy and hot. For the first few moments, I felt lost, not sure about directions, groping for my helmet and my weapon. I reached out and found 3 grenades and lined them up in front of me. The pins had already been straightened for quick throwing. And then, for maybe half an hour, I just kneeled there in the dark and waited. Very gradually, in tiny slivers, dawn began to break through the morning fog. And from my position in the brush, I could see 10 or 15 meters up the trail. The mosquitoes were fierce. I remember slapping at them, wondering if I should wake up Kiowa and ask for some repellent, and then thinking that was a bad idea, and then looking up and seeing the young man come out of the morning fog. He wore black clothing, rubber sandals, and a gray ammunition belt. His shoulders were slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side as if listening for something. He seemed at ease. He carried his weapon in one hand, muzzle down, moving without any hurry up the center of the trail. There was no sound at all, none that I can remember. And in a way, it seemed he was part of the fog, or part of my own imagination. But there was also the reality of what was happening in my stomach. I had already come up to a crouch. It was entirely automatic. I did not hate the young man. I did not see him as the enemy. I did not ponder issues of morality or politics or patriotism or military duty. I just crouched and kept my head down. I tried to swallow whatever was rising from my stomach, which tasted like lemonade, something fruity and sour. I was terrified. There were no thoughts about killing. That grenade was to make him go away, just evaporate. And I felt my head go empty, felt it fill up again. I had already thrown the grenade before telling myself to throw it. It was gone. The brush was thick, and I had to lob it high, not aiming. And I remember that grenade seeming to freeze above me for just an instant, as if a camera had clicked. And I remember ducking down, holding my breath, and seeing little wisps of fog rise from the earth. The grenade bounced once and rolled across the trail. I did not hear it, but there must have been a sound, because the young man dropped his weapon and began to run. Just 2 or 3 quick steps. And he stopped and turned to his right and looked down at the grenade and tried to cover his head, but never did. It occurred to me then that he was about to die. I wanted to warn him. The grenade made a popping noise, not soft, but not loud either. Not what you'd expect, just a pop. And there was a puff of dust, smoke, a small white puff. And the young man seemed to jerk upward, as if pulled by invisible wires. He fell at his back. His rubber sandals had been blown off. He lay at the center of the trail, his right leg bent beneath him, his one eye shut, his other eye a huge star-shaped hole. For me, it was not a matter of live or die. I was in no real danger. Almost certainly the young man would have passed me by. And it will always be that way. Later, I remember my friend Kiowa tried to tell me that the man would have died anyway. He told me it was a good kill. He told me I was a soldier. This was a war. That I should shape up and stop staring and ask myself what the dead man would have done if things were reversed. But you see, none of that mattered. The words were way too complicated. All I could do was gape at the fact of the young man's body. Even now, 4 decades later, I haven't finished sorting it out. Sometimes I forgive myself. Other times I don't. In the ordinary hours of life, I try not to dwell on it. And now and then, when I'm reading a newspaper, just sitting alone in a room, I'll look up and I'll see the young man step out of the morning fog. I'll watch him walk toward me, his shoulders slightly stooped, his head cocked to the side, and he'll pass within a few yards of me and suddenly smile at some secret thought, and then continue up the trail to where it bends back into the morning fog. Well, why do I choose this passage? There are a whole bunch of reasons I chose it. One is it's just short enough to talk about. Reason number 1 is that for some of you in this room, this passage is going to have a pretty nasty relevance in your lives sooner than you may think, and it may already have a relevance for you. Some of you may well end up in the military. Others are certainly going to have friends, maybe brothers, maybe uncles, maybe even fathers in the military. And this story it's a war story at its most basic. It's a story about death, which was what war is. It's a sanctioned, legal homicide. People killing one another. It's a story in which one death, yes, that of an enemy soldier, is lingered over for at least a little while, and kind of magnified. You sort of pause and look at one person's death. As you see the grenade come out, You turn away, you look down, try to cover your head, but you never get there. The grenade's already exploded and you're gone. In a way, the story is a response to those newspaper and TV reports we get every night from Baghdad or Kabul in Afghanistan. And those reports are almost always the same. 8 guys died today when an IED went off, in Baghdad or wherever. End the story, onto the economy. You get a number, people dead, you don't even get names. And you get the word dead, and that's it. And this story is what every novelist does, no matter whether you're writing about families or love, or you try to put some humanity into what would otherwise just be statistics that you would get on, the evening news broadcast. My object in writing fiction is to try to breathe life into what we're going through right now, not just 40-some years ago. Second reason that I wanted to talk a little bit about this story, or chapter, is that it's not true. As I know many of you have learned in class, it's invented, it's made up. Even though, as I read it, I think you could tell at one point I still started to kind of tear up at the part near the end, where it flashes back to now, and my character is sitting alone in a room, and you look up, and there comes your history walking right at you, once again, as it happens for me every night as I lie in bed, where my dead friends, Vietnamese from my past, and this war just keeps happening and happening and happening. Wars don't end when you sign peace treaties. They do not end. They go on in memory, and not just to the soldiers, but in the kids of the soldiers, and in the wives, and the lovers, and brothers and sisters. They do not end. Right now, down in Orlando, Florida, there's a black woman. She's now 94 years old. And every night at 2 a.m., she wakes up the same time every night and says, "Where's my baby? Where's my baby?" Well, her baby has been dead for 40 years. My best friend in Vietnam, a kid named Chip Merricks, who one day stepped on a landmine and was blown into a tree, which is also written about in the things they carried. Well, do you think the war is over for Mrs. Merricks, that 94-year-old woman? If you think it's over with, you're crazy. It goes on in her head, and it'll go on in her head. That sorrow of a lost child to this ridiculous war fought for reasons that are way beyond me. I'm wearing a white shirt. You can see it up here. And I wore it today for a reason. On this shirt, and the little tag in the back, guess what it says? It says, "Made in Vietnam." We were told as soldiers and as citizens 40 years ago that there'd be catastrophe if we lost this war. The communists won and took over the southern part of their own country. And I'm up before you now, 40 years later. Is this what you call catastrophe? I'm wearing a product I could have worn if we'd won or lost. We're doing trade with that place. People are visiting it as tourists. Just came down from San Diego, where we were driving from, and I was talking to a bunch of college kids there, all of whom had spent the summer touring the place as tourists, riding their bikes around, this war zone. Is that catastrophe? Is that the dominoes toppled? And we lost the war. And none of that. So there's Mrs. Merricks, this 94-year-old woman down in Orlando whose child died for this war, my best friend. Sometimes wars are worth the fighting. Sometimes there are good reasons for them. But there are times when there are not good reasons for them. When they're stupid. And we shouldn't be killing one another for reasons that are ridiculous. Say, for example, the Trojan Wars. A woman named Helen gets abducted. For the next 12 years, people are killing one another over a kidnapping. What if, how you multiply examples by that, such as a war to get rid of weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. It'd be like fighting Pearl Harbor. I mean, fighting World War II. You're my dad, you're on a destroyer, you're at Iwo Jima, you're being attacked by kamikazes, and a bulletin comes in. Pearl Harbor never happened. Mistake, didn't occur. Part of being an adult, part of maturing as a citizen of this country and of any country is to be able to use your conscience and to separate when is force necessary and when is it not necessary. And this story is my way of responding to questions such as those. I'm not a liberal, I'm not a conservative, though if I were to say what I was, I'd probably lean toward the conservative. I grew up in a little tiny cow town in Minnesota, brought up a Methodist, and by Methodist in that place, it was pretty fundamental Methodism. We took the Bible literally. For example, there is a phrase in the Bible, thou shalt not kill. And we took it pretty literally, the way, literalists do. There were no exceptions, like except when your country tells you to do it. That's not in the Bible. If you're a fundamentalist, that's not there. It's a commandment, and it's without exception. Then, 5 years after listening to this in Sunday school and church, I find myself in Vietnam, where I'm told, you better kill, or we'll court-martial you. Well, who's right and who's wrong? That's my country talking to me through my company commander. And there's the Bible talking to me through this ear. Well, this too feeds into the word kill. This is a killing that I just read you. What do you do when the truths that are coming at you are so contradictory? Or your country with absolute confidence tells you one truth, we're going to go kill people for good reasons, so the country says, and you got a tradition that says you shouldn't be doing this sort of thing. Where does truth lie? That's a commentary on the whole, I'm trying to compress a lot of the things that you carry into what I'm saying, but that's a commentary on why I'm fiddling with this notion of truth throughout the book. You leave it and you say, well, what happened, and what's true, and what's not true? The problem with those questions is oftentimes you don't know the answer as to what's true and what's not true. The world's a puzzling and mysterious and ambiguous place, and there will be plenty of times in your lives, just like there was in my life in Vietnam, when you're not going to know what's true. You're going to be so confused, you're going to be upside down. And boy, you never find yourself more upside down than when the stakes are life and death. Okay, so the story's invented. No Kathleen, no trail junction, no white flowers, no hand grenade, no slim, dead, dainty young man. It's all invented. On the other hand, it is true. Because you see, there were dozens, probably scores of such ambushes that I went out during my tour in Vietnam. Probably 50 of them. I'd say roughly every, third or fourth night, we'd go out and lie out on an ambush. Sometimes people would die. Most often, nothing at all would happen. You just lie there, watch in the dark all night, and head back to the hill where the rest of the guys were encamped. But now and then people would die, and this story is a way of compressing all those corpses, all those blown claymores and hand grenades and all that horror into one single invented event. Yeah, it's invented, but it's based on night after night of lying there watching trail junctions, sometimes with things such as I described in the story happening. The next reason I wanted to concentrate on this story is to make a kind of, commentary to you about the consequences of death in wars. You would think that you kill an enemy soldier, you'd feel a sense of elation or victory or emotions such as those. Maybe even we've done our patriotic duty. There's one fewer dead enemy, there's one fewer alive enemy soldiers out there. But instead, what any combat veteran's going to tell you is you look down at the body and what do you really feel once it's all over? You feel an incredible sense of guilt. After all, there's a dead 16-year-old kid lying there, dressed in his black pajamas and carrying a little weapon. And yeah, he may have wanted to be killing you at one point, but not anymore. He's dead. And he had a mom and a dad, just like you do, and probably a girlfriend, and sisters and brothers who are gonna mourn him. And he probably didn't want to be there any more than I did, or my fellow soldiers wanted to be there. That I have more in common with the dead and the living enemy from my war than I do with any of you. And with your fathers and mothers, I got a lot more in common with them. We went through this together on different sides. We share a lot more memories. And I certainly have a lot more in common with them than I do with the pot-bellied, nostalgic vets riding on their 4th of July floats, tossing out the candy and full of their nostalgia and bragging. Combat veterans don't do that sort of stuff. You're too sad, you go silent, and you don't talk about it. I gotta really watch the time here. That's 20 minutes. I'm gonna stop, because I want to leave plenty of time for questions, okay? There's more I had planned to say here, but I'm gonna make myself stop. Usually I just keep going and say, you can sit here till I'm done, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna stop now and take questions about anything you'd like. You can ask about writing in general, this book in particular, or this story, whatever you'd like. There's one back here.
Wait, you guys come all around here. I guess over here. Line up over here.
And you guys can just pass it.
Hi, Mr. O'Brien. My name is Rocky Uma. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you.
The way you constructed the things you carry, or they carry, with a sense of verisimilitude, portrays the connection of your experiences in Vietnam. Do you believe that a writer needs to have endured suffering in their life to adequately express that suffering in writing?
Say that again one last time, the question. Just the last sentence.
Do you believe that a writer needs to have endured suffering in their life to adequately express that suffering in writing?
Yeah, I do. I'll say a couple more words more, but I really do. That you don't write stories about happy stuff. You don't write a story saying, this morning I got up and had a bowl of Cheerios and they were really good. Not great, but pretty good. And went to work and that was a pretty good day and came home and had a pretty good steak. Not great, but pretty good. And I went to bed about 9. People just stare at you because there's no story. So you make stories up out of the opposite, of tension and struggle, and suffering is one of those things. So yeah, I think you did good. And I'm not talking just about tragedy, I'm talking about comedy too. Take any Woody Allen comedy movie. But you guys even, I guess you guys may not even know who he is. But he used to make really great movies. He's still alive, he still makes good ones. And they're actually human beings and not robots in them. They're people in his movies. They're really good. I never watched one of these once. And but he said once, what my comedy, what people are laughing about is, my storied, pitiful life that I so messed up. He doesn't use the word mess. He uses another word, and he means that. Anti-Semitism and all these failed marriages and his, he spent probably half of his life and almost all his money in a shrink's office. And he's made out of this experience, this little Jewish guy having all these troubles, he's made some really great comedy. So it's not just tragedy that can come out of suffering, so too can.
Thank you.
You bet.
In the Sweetheart of Soldier Bomb, the story's event of a soldier bringing his girlfriend to war is not probable. Can you explain the origin of the character Mary Ann and the significance of her transformation?
Yeah, the origins right out of the real world. She's, as far as I know, real. That seems, again, that you use the word improbable, and it is improbable. I didn't believe it. As soon as I got to Vietnam, I gotta talk fast now, so I got a squeeze of time. I heard the story right away, as soon as I got to my final company, called it your terminal unit. How's that for a phrase? And I heard it again. I heard it a week later and again. Guys just saying, did you hear about this girl who showed up in the Song Trabong camp, which was up in the mountains about 8 miles away. You could see these mountains. I was mostly in the paddy land but off to the west there were these really big mountains. And yeah, she was up there, and I heard again, and heard again. And I, like the characters in the story, didn't believe a word of it. I thought, that's impossible. And then I came back to the States, and I started hearing it again. And one day I was in Seattle after my first book had come out, and a guy came through the book signing line and said, I was up in the Special Forces camp. Did you hear? And I said, I know what you're going to tell me. So I heard it from him. He was a Green Beret Special Forces guy, but he didn't stop there. He said, you got to come for a drink after the signing. I'm going to talk to you. And so I went out for him after, went to a Hilton bar, and he said, I got to make you believe this. Why don't you believe it? He said, you spent a year in Nam, and all the wacko stuff that happened to you, how come you don't believe this? If this person's name was Jack, you'd believe it. Same age, we all went over there young and naive, full of romantic ideals, and we all got brutal, much as Marianne does. We got dipped in crankcase oil or dipped in sin. Yeah, we were brutal. You might think of Americans as always wearing a white hat. Well, look at those images you saw up there and multiply them. We were wearing, at best, gray hats. Doing our best, but in really savage conditions. So he said to me, what happened to me, this Green Beret guy, you know, it happened to her, it happened to you. Men and women, he said, are different, that's for sure, but we're not that different. It's not as if, you know, women are gophers and men are badgers. We're all human, and we know what love is, and fear, and terror, and guilt, and all the rest. Then he also pointed out to me that there's a statue in Washington that stands on the mall by the wall. It's a statue to the women who served in Vietnam. There are lots of them, nurses, and I've met them along the book tour route. And what we call donut dollies. There's young, kind of good-looking girls would fly in helicopters and bring us Kool-Aid and cookies. If you can believe that. If we didn't want the Kool-Aid or cookies, we wanted them. But they were there were journalists, and there were, secretaries for contractors, and there was there were just women. There weren't, millions. We had them way outnumbered, but they were certainly present, and certainly doing stuff that was dangerous. And some of them died. In fact, as soon as I arrived in Nam, a nurse was killed in a rocket attack in July. Anyway, I started thinking about it. And I decided I had to write a story about this that put a woman in combat boots, my own, and see what happens to her through the story. And that's what the story was born. Well, I never saw this person with my own eyeballs. I'll admit that to you. But I'll also say to you, I've never seen President Obama in my own eyes. And I believe he exists. Don't you? I mean, you get enough evidence, and you get, okay, the odds are the person exists. Well, I have so much evidence about this woman. On top of that, there's the whole logistical thing. It's not hard to buy a plane ticket in Cleveland and fly to LA, and buy another plane ticket and fly to Thailand, and buy another plane ticket and fly to Saigon. Anybody could do it. They wouldn't check your age, or you just could do it. And once you get to Saigon, and you're this good-looking cheerleader type, we got all these guys that take you anywhere else you want to go. So no logistical problems at all. It could have been done. There's nothing improbable about it at all. All you do is buy a ticket. So that's what stuff stories are often made of, are bizarre, kind of offbeat sounding things. And your job as a writer is to sort of explore the bizarre and the offbeat and find some measure of truth in it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. O'Brien, in the things they carried, the soldiers carried tangible items that signified intangible weight. Did you carry a special tangible item or still carry one today?
I did. I carried, there's a character in the book that has his girlfriend's pantyhose around his neck, and that's what I had. Her name was Gail, and she wasn't a girlfriend, that's exaggerating. She had had a couple of dates with her. I really fell for her. And before I left, I asked, give me some object of yours that I just keep with me, something to live for, basically, and I come home for. And that's what she gave me, and that's what I carried. They didn't survive, no, they got wrecked and finally lost at some point.
Is there any special reason you're always wearing a hat?
Yeah, I was actually going to start by talking about it. I forgot the hat. Okay, Vietnam's over, and the day to come home arrives. We called it in Vietnam the DERO state, and it's the Army acronym for Date of Estimated Return from Overseas. And the day comes, it's all over, and I've survived. And I remember coming in and taking a shower, getting on a helicopter, and flying up to Da Nang, and waiting there for a couple of hours and getting on a jet. And by getting on a jet, I don't mean a military one, I mean a civilian aircraft. Back then they had what we call stewardesses, now they're called flight attendants, and those little TV dinners I used to serve when the airline served your food back then. And it was just like being on a civilian jet, getting on in Jacksonville, Florida, and flying to Chicago. And the stewardesses went through the plane, spraying the plane full of this stuff to kill all the microbes and bacteria on us. And we flew to Japan, took on fuel, and flew back and flew into Seattle. Got there about 10 at night, something like that. And I remember looking out of the window and seeing down below the golden arches of McDonald's, which it's such a cheap, tawdry thing, And I wasn't even back then much of a Big Mac guy, but it brought tears to my eyes. And it still does. So there's America, that place I grew up in, and I loved, and I'm back, and I'm alive. And got off the plane, and touched the runway, and then I went into this place, this kind of big building where we all filed in, and there was a sign in front that said, "Welcome home, returnees," a word only the Army would use. You're going through this hell, and they call you a returnee. I mean, I'm not even sure that word's in the dictionary. Maybe it is. And then we ate the steak dinner, and then we got haircuts and said the Pledge of Allegiance, and we all left and went out to the airport and got on our separate planes to go home. And I got on a plane that was bound for Minnesota, my home state, and the plane took off about, I don't know, probably 6 in the morning, something like that, very early. Flew out of Seattle and headed out over, Washington and Montana and North Dakota, and somewhere over North Dakota in March, I was linked to the back of that plane, and I took off my uniform and put on a sweater, blue jeans, and a baseball cap. And haven't taken the cap off since. And not in a literal sense, it's not on in the shower or something like that. But out in public, I wear it as a token of remembering, and I have now for 4 decades, had this cap on my head. It's a way of making myself remember what so many people forget, including my fellow soldiers. It's so easy to forget, and I was determined not to. You're welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Brien. I noticed that while reading The Man I Killed, I actually felt regret and guilt that the character felt. Did you ever actually kill someone?
I'll never know. It says in one of the chapters of the book that there's no way of knowing. War is chaotic. It's not, what is it, the Private Ryan movie? Was it for Finding Private Ryan? Saving Private Ryan. Where there's the enemy and they're the good guys, and we're all lined up in these neat battle lines, and they've got uniforms on, and we've got uniforms on to tell one another apart. The war is not that way. It's the ones I fought in, and certainly not the ones going on in Iraq and Afghanistan right now, where you can't tell your friends from your enemies. There's no way of knowing unless they're shooting at you. Then you know, but by then it's too late. And it's all chaotic. Gunfire coming out of jungle settings and from behind hedgerows and smoky little villages. And only once in my entire tour in Vietnam did I ever see the living enemy. They were shooting at me and mortar rounds coming in and gunfire. But they had this good sense to duck and hide, and they're not gonna like stand up like in the Civil War and sort of march toward you. It doesn't happen that way anymore. So I rarely even saw them. So we all sprayed gunfire out, and they'd spray gunfire at us, and then there'd be bodies at the end of it. Whether a bullet from my weapon ever struck anybody, I'll never know. It's beyond knowing, and that's true for almost all of my fellow soldiers. There are 2 or 3 who claim they know that they actually killed someone, but by and large, in these kinds of wars, you really have no idea. And yet, when I write about the story I just read to you, I can, for a second, take some kind of responsibility. It's not enough to say, I don't know. I was there, I was a soldier, I pulled the trigger. I'm responsible. Whether I know for certain whether a bullet from my weapon hit somebody or not. And so the answer to your question is, I don't know, and nor do most of my fellow soldiers know.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hi.
Hi. In your book, you utilize the savior motif as well as reference
The what motif?
savior,
Oh, right.
as well as reference religion several times, and you
Right.
talked earlier about being raised religious.
Mhm.
Do you consider yourself religious now?
In a different kind of way, yeah. I still have a sense of the mystery of the world we live in. We're all part of something, this universal birth canal thing. We all come down, we all come out into the light, and we're all headed for the grave. Whether it's in a war, that's where you're headed. And we're all headed there, and we're all part of this thing that has for me a kind of holiness or sacredness in which we all try to do our best to comport ourselves with some kind of measure of decency at some point in our lives. And comport ourselves without hypocrisy. If you're going to say something like, hey, let's go to war somewhere, and you're going to get on TV and talk about it, or get up in the halls of Congress, that's fine. It's a free country. But go yourself. If you're so hot for the killing and the dying, get your butt over there and do it. And don't call on somebody else like you and you and you and you to do it. And by the way, don't hide your kid away at Harvard or Yale or Stanford or University of Texas. Send your kid, your beautiful 17-year-old son that you love to death, and have him die for your cause. If you're so for a war, go to it and send your own blood. Put your blood where your mouth is. That you can hear in my voice, the Vietnam anger. This is not politics talking. This is sitting at foxholes after death talking. All that belligerent, bellicose rhetoric, and all that grand rhetoric stuff about how, die for your country stuff. If you're so for it, that's fine, but do it yourself. So that's a strange answer to your question, but that's my answer. You're welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Rania, and
Hi.
in Ambush, you talked about how your daughter asked you if you ever killed a man, and you didn't have any children then.
Right.
Now that you've known what it's felt like to be a father, do you see that scene playing out any different?
You bet. Part of being a fiction writer is being constantly surprised how things you've invented and then happen all around you. Not even all the time. That's just one example. As you know, I've got a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old kid now, both boys, and the questions they're asking are exactly that question. That's why I actually put a Kathleen in the book. I needed a character to say, did you ever kill anyone? Adults almost never do it. It was done today, but very rarely. And I needed a child to do it. And now I've got 2 real ones, and they're asking the question Kathleen asked in this fiction written 20-some years ago. In almost exactly the same kinds of words. The older one in particular, the 8-year-old, is of the age where he knows not just that I'm a writer, but he knows the kinds of books I've written. He hasn't read one yet. I won't let him. But pretty soon he's going to. And the questions he's asking, he's going to get more and more curious about it, the way Kathleen got more and more curious to the point where the narrator of the story actually brought her over to Vietnam to say, you want to know why your father's messed up and what's been going through his head and why he can't sleep at night? I'm going to show it to you. I can't find the words, so I'm just going to bring you with me and show you. And my dream is that maybe I can do that with my own kids, actually show them Vietnam. The places that Hemingway used to say, that what's really sacred when it comes to wars are just the names of places, that river's name and that village's name, and that stuff is sacred. And to bring my little boys to a rice paddy that 4 decades ago was just bubbling with machine gun fire, just the water just like bubbling. And not just machine gun fire, mortar rounds coming in on top of that stuff, and I'm lying there wounded, thinking, dear Jesus, let me live, dear Jesus. And to show them that really sacred piece of ground where men did die. I made it out of that nightmare, but other guys didn't. That's my dream, to do with my own sons what I did with Kathleen in the book. You're welcome.
Connecting with what you said, we learned you actually did return to Vietnam. How many years after the war was that, and did you?
How many years after the war was what?
Your return to Vietnam.
Oh, okay.
And did you experience a sense of closure from that visit?
Okay, I gotta be careful how I answer this. There was a return to Vietnam, but it's not the return in the book. I returned to Vietnam after writing about the return in the book. In other words, I didn't go back to Vietnam when that book was written. I went back in the year 1994 for the New York Times. I didn't go with my daughter, although it was kind of that way. It was a girlfriend at the time who was 20 years younger, so I guess she could have been my daughter. Now that I think about it. And, she wanted to know why I couldn't sleep at night and was waking up and, screaming these obscenities in my sleep and all the stuff that veterans do. And I brought her with me to show it to her. I found that rice paddy I just told you about, the bubbling one. And God, it was such an incredible sensation to be standing. It's like going to your backyard when you're a little kid, and there it is, that's your backyard. Everything's exactly where you remember it. You think maybe time must have effaced or changed all this, and it didn't. It was just instantly recognizable. And standing there and seeing this place, which in my memory was, just a cauldron of horror, now at peace, and to see the sunlight striking the rice, and this little boy aboard a water buffalo waving at me. It put a new Vietnam in my head. That the old one will always be there, that old rice paddy, but now there's this new one that's a place of peace, and there's kind of content that was not, of course, there during all this savagery going on for so many years, where people seem kind of happy. They're not rich, but they seem pretty content. In a way, they certainly didn't seem when I was there. And I look in the eyeballs of these people and see such fear and such hatred. And there's a better world now. That peace is a good thing. And part of me wants to say to you, it's on my notes here, because I'm trying not to look at, but I don't write war books, I write peace books. That's what they're supposed to be about in the end. Yeah, the surface is war, but be careful about it. Peace is better. And peace is a shy thing that doesn't ever brag about itself. And you're at peace in here, but you didn't think that when you were sitting there. Nobody thought it, including me. Until I say it, and then you say, yeah, I am. And it's pretty good. You're not bubbling with excitement and happiness, but it's a lot better than the opposite, because you know when you're in a war, it's loud, it's noisy, and it's scary, and it's right in your face. And going back to Vietnam all those years, 94 now, that was a long time ago, was a reminder of that little lesson.
Thank you.
You bet. Hi.
Hello, Mr. Ryan. My name is Dean Rice Walkers.
Hi.
We have heard a lot in the news lately about post-traumatic stress disorder and our soldiers returning from Afghanistan. Would you say you experienced post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms upon returning from Vietnam? And if so, how did you deal with it? And do you still deal with it today?
Well, I can't separate out Vietnam from just general trauma life delivers. I don't know if I did or not. I really don't. I do know that I had an outlet that other veterans usually don't have. I could write about it. Most veterans go silent of not just my war, but of a lot of wars. Or if they talk about it, they talk about it elliptically. They go around the sides, and don't really talk about it. And I had this way, by opening a door, I could let all that stuff out. Even so, I already told you that I can't sleep at night, and all this stuff keeps coming back, despite doing that. Well, imagine if I didn't have the outlet, what it would be like. It'd be like what my friends are going through, and I hear whenever I see them, guys I served with over there. And not just my friends, you've got to remember the Vietnamese count in this equation too. They were the other side. They got their own bad dreams, and they're like B-52 dreams, and the nightmare of technology dreams and stuff coming at you. So that's one answer to your question. Another answer is, you send guys to war, and women, what do you expect? Do you expect anything different than anxiety and sleeplessness and suicide and broken homes? If you expect anything else, you're nuts. That's what war is. That's what it delivers. And you can go back to the most oldest texts about war, and that's what's you're gonna bring home with you. On top of that, how do I say this diplomatically, but it's not just what you witnessed that you're losing sleep over and the friends you lost and all that. It's the stuff you did that keeps you awake at night. I'll wake up seeing this lieutenant nicknamed Mad Mark beating up on an old 80-year-old, 85-year-old farmer. It had been a bad day, and it had been a casualty. A good guy everybody loved was killed, and came into a ville and found this old man and tied him up to a sapling, and this lieutenant began beating on his shins. He had little, like, pipes for legs. He was old, and hitting his shins with a tree branch over and over. Anybody who's been hit once in the shins knows how much it hurts. It really hurts. And imagine, bam, UVC, over and over and over and over and over. Okay, I'm witnessing this on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm taking part in it. That is, I'm not hitting him. But I'm not saying, stop, this is a war crime, cut it out. I stayed dead silent. Totally silent. Why? For a bunch of reasons. One is too embarrassed to speak up, don't want to look like a sissy in front of my fellow soldiers. Another thing is I'm ticked off too. Because a guy died on our side, a few hours earlier. My friend too. So I'm angry. I stayed silent. And something about that silence is what wakes me up all these years later, not speaking up. And it happened repetitively. It's part of the reason I went to the war in the first place, as I wrote about in the book, the things he carried. And just a fear of, I don't want to look in front of my hometown like a coward or a sissy. I'm going to go to the war just because it's expected of me, even though I thought the war was wrong. So that's my answer to your question. You're going to have memories of things you witnessed, but you're also going to bring home stuff you did that you ought to wake up over. You ought to pick the scab and remember your misdeeds. Otherwise, we're just going to keep doing it forever. And part of me knows I and my fellow veterans have to go through this stuff.
I hate to do this, but this is going to be the last question, or we're not going to have time to have our book signing. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Last question, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
No pressure.
Well, as I was reading the novel, I kept thinking what authors or pieces of literature might have inspired you to write it, and also what, if anything, are you currently working on?
Okay, I'm inspired by the whole gamut of stuff you wouldn't expect, like the Hardy Boys and Tom Swift and Nancy Drew. King the Big Boy Now, Larry the Little League. I mentioned all these books in my childhood. They're a batch more. Not out of facetiousness, not to be cute, but because it's true. Those books made me love reading. Yeah, they're not great literature. They're not going to be taught in high school or college English classes, but they got me reading. And they got me to leave that little boring town I grew up in southern Minnesota, and leave it through Huck Finn on a raft, or Tom Swift flying off to Mars, or the Hardy Boys catching smugglers, or whatever it was. I love losing myself in books that somehow appeal to my sense of adventure, and it contained little moral stuff going on too. There was this book I read when I was probably 6 or 5 years old that I've never forgotten called Busy Timmy. And I took it very personally because of the title, that it's like, you know, Timmy can tie his shoes and Timmy can go to school by himself. And I thought, God, how does this author know so much about me and where did he learn this stuff? And he knows my most intimate secrets. And when you think about it, that's the books that hit you, books that you do take personally. That's what good books are. You find something in them, even though they're foreign, they might be about a war or stuff you've never been through. Something in it, it'll hit a bell. What would I do if I went through that? How would I behave? Would I be brave or would I be a coward? Oh, whatever. And then when you grow older and other books filtered in, the modernists, you know, Hemingway and Dos Passos, Stein and Joyce. And then I got beguiled and by what are called magical realists, which includes books like Alice in Wonderland, you know, where just sort of magical things, impossible things happen. But the South American writers like Borges and Marquez, they fed in. And then just like general reading, it's not always fiction, but it's just, I like reading history and biography, and I learn stuff about the world that really shocks me and it takes me by surprise. For example, I'm reading a book now, a biography of Hemingway called Hemingway's Boat. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about Ernest Hemingway. I read all his own writing and read all the biography. I thought I knew it all. It turns out I didn't. I learned that of his children, there was Jack, Patrick, and a guy named Gregory. There's 3 sons of Ernest Hemingway, and it turns out that Hemingway was this kind of tyrannical father, and loving. I don't want to skew it. He was both. He'd be a tyrant and loving, sort of egging his guys on to these macho deeds. They could fish, they could hunt. Yeah, they'd kill you at a drop of a hat. I'm exaggerating, but you get the macho thing going on, right? On the other hand, there's a softness to Hemingway when he was gentle and kind beyond description. And to read about what happens to his children is the sad ends these kids all came to. One of whom, Gregory, the youngest, had a lifelong battle with. He was a transvestite from the time he was like 4, dressing up in his mom's clothes, and they'd try to hide it. And his father discovered him doing this at age 12 or so, but he couldn't stop. He spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars going to shrinks to stop this urge. And late in his life, he got married like 4 times, and always unhappily, or 3 times. I had a sex change operation, ended up dead down in Florida somewhere in a morgue slab, a bum or a hobo, a rich one, that is, he'd inherit a lot of money, but still just a hobo. This horrid life. Something in that story, which is nonfiction I read, is feeding into the second part of your question, which is what am I working on now? I'm working on a book about being a dad. That's why his books, you know, about Hemingway means so much to me. And a father doing his best and sometimes not doing very well. And how things can go wrong as a parent, and things can never turn out the way you want. That ultimately, children become adults, and they become individuals, and they're going to lead their own lives no matter what you do. And you're helpless, as Hemingway was here, without option. You can't do anything about it beyond control your own life as best you can by setting an example. And that's what I'm trying to do, and that's the book I'm working on right now. Okay, I want to thank you all for my time here. Again, sorry to keep you waiting.
Tim O'Brien, that was awesome. Great experience. Really enjoyed it. He's a pretty funny guy, and good stories from the war. Good lessons learned today. All around good time.
Okay. It was good seeing the author in person, knowing the face to the book, and it was interesting to see that some of the experiences he put into the book weren't all real, but some of them were.
speaks of truth, and there's something about truth that resonates with him, I think, and the truth that he conveys to an audience through fiction, which is just, you know, there's an oddity to that, and I think that really says something about his character, and particularly him as a Vietnam veteran.